basically 1 through 3 is where we want to start. I want to start with the nature of the burnt offering. The nature of the burnt offering. Okay, so some things about the burnt offering that we find here in verses 1 through 3. I read through verse 6, just in case we get a little bit further than what I have prepared for, well, not prepared for, but planned on, put it that way. So maybe somebody can think of some things. I'm wondering, Mary might be in this. I know she read the book, so you might be ahead of the game if you haven't read it. Maybe we could pull some things out. What are some interesting things that we see here about the burnt offering, specifically as we look at verses 1 through 3? Anybody have any ideas of something about that burnt offering that maybe jumps out to you, verses 1 through 3? Mary, go ahead. It was voluntary. Okay, that's probably the big one as we look through these there's 5 different offerings that we're going to look at: the burnt offering, the meat offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. As we go through, every one we're going to look at, say, is it voluntary or is it mandated? Is it something that God required of them? This one is a voluntary act. As we look at it now, that's not the first one I had, so we're going to jump down to it. But verse number 3, if his burnt offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will. His own voluntary will. So this is an offering that was given that was voluntary. What was this offering for? Okay, why would somebody want to give this offering? What was the purpose of the burnt offering? Why would somebody voluntarily give a burnt offering? Let me ask it that way. Stephanie?
Maybe in thanks.
Okay, in thanks. Okay, we're going to get into why it talks about those different things. It's a little different than that. So I don't believe this one is a thanks. Sam? Okay, this one is for sin. So this, an atonement, do I want to phrase it that way? I have to think about that. Yeah, okay, yes, I would say yes. Okay, this one is, I know I have sinned, so I am going to offer a burnt offering to ask for forgiveness or ask God for atonement. So yeah, I'd say you're all right with the word atonement there. This is an offering for forgiveness for sins, for our sins. So this one, and I want to be really careful as we're going through that, because some are, as we look at the reason we got on this kind of a little bit of rabbit trail is this one is voluntary. This one is, in other words, the idea behind this one is, I know I've sinned. I need to make sure I go to God and ask for forgiveness, to make an atonement for the sin that I've done. This one isn't one of those mandatory ones. So this is a little different. As we look at these, and maybe the order could be a little different, what would be the... Boy, I'm not sure how to ask this without giving away some things for later on. Okay, I'll ask it this way. As a Christian, how does then this apply to us? Or how would this, as a picture in the Old Testament, how would this picture apply to the New Testament for the Christian today? I'm not sure I'm asking it very clearly, but Stephanie has an idea. So.
Well, I didn't really have an idea about that. I was going to ask if maybe it could be for sins too that you committed but you don't remember.
Sure. So it's kind of like what Job was offering sacrifices for his children. Like he said to God, in case they have committed something, some kind of sin. Yeah, I would say that as well. I guess what I'm asking for, would this equate to a salvation offering? Is this equal to salvation, or is this what would it then be the equivalent of in the New Testament? What? I know I'm not asking this well. Everybody shook their heads, so you knew the answer to the first question. Michael, can you?
It's because it's forgiveness of sin, but to keep fellowship.
Okay, so it's to keep fellowship. So the idea of this, I know I'm not speaking very clearly, but It's like asking you to follow my logic. That's really, really difficult for most people. Thanks, Mary. She's like, nobody can do that. Good luck with that. What I'm trying to get the point across is this isn't picture salvation, okay? We'll get to that. That's more of what we need to do. It's mandatory. This pictures our fellowship with God. In other words, this would be more like a person who is saved, who has sinned, and that fellowship, that walk with God is broken, and now we need to come and we need to offer something. We need to get forgiveness. We need to get atonement for that sin to get our fellowship back with God. That's why it's voluntary. If we were to sin and then don't ask for forgiveness, what are we doing? We are voluntarily staying away or on the wrong path and saying, I don't want that relationship healed. I don't want that relationship fixed. This being a voluntary act is saying, I know I have done wrong. I know I have trespassed against God. I've sinned. I've missed the mark. I need to get that fellowship back. So I'm going to go offer a burnt offering before the Lord to get that fellowship back. And we're going to talk today specifically, after we get through the nature of it, of the offerer's work. Okay, what the offerer is required according to the chapter to do and what that means for him. We'll get to the priest's work and then God's work probably in another lesson. But I'd like to get to the offerer's work today. So this equates a little bit more to then a Christian's fellowship, pictures a Christian fellowship or walk with God than it does to an unsaved person needing to be saved. So I wanted to make sure that was clear. So it's a voluntary offering. The nature of it is it's voluntary. Anybody else see anything else in verses 1 through 3? I have two more things that we want to pull out of here. What else about this offering can you see here? Mary got it's voluntary, which we got in verse number 3. We're not going to find much in verse 1. That's kind of an introductory thing. God comes to Moses. Anybody else see anything there? If not, that's fine. I'll give it to you. What's that? Without blemish. We'll get to that. That talks about a little bit more that maybe we don't quite want to get into yet. That's a little ahead of things. But that's good. That is still good. Mary?
Not sure on this one. It says of flock and of herd.
We will get to that. I want to get to that point, but that's not quite where I'm looking for the nature as a whole. Maybe I should say it this way. Rather than saying the nature of it, I should say something interesting that you see here, maybe something different. Oh, you know what? One of them isn't found in these 3 verses, so I've hurt you there. Ha! We are going to get into that part, Mary, that you talked about, the herd and the cattle, all that stuff. Let's look at it here. I'll help you out. Rats, I did not write down the verse. Let's look at it in Leviticus chapter 6. Remember we talked about 1 through 5 being each chapter is an offering. Leviticus chapter 6 kind of gets them all and gives us a little bit more information about it. Verse number 9, it says this, in verse 8, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. So we're specifically talking about the burnt offering here. It is a burnt offering because of the burning upon the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be burning it. Verse 12, and the fire of the altar shall be burning in it, and it shall not be put out. The priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and lay the burnt offering in order upon it, and he shall burn thereon the fat of the peace offering. So it talks about the peace offering. What else I want to point out is, one, it was burned all night. Or second thing, I guess we already talked about, it was voluntary. It was burned all night. This was something that was happening. Another thing that I want to point out here, and this is a little bit more maybe generic or something overall to think about, but what was never supposed to go out? The fire for the burnt offerings. Maybe somebody has an idea of what this tells us about the burnt offering, the nature of the burnt offering. It's kind of bringing us around to the point. And I apologize because I should have told you that we needed to read chapter 6 too. What does this tell us about the nature of the burnt offering? The fire for the burnt offering on the altar was supposed to continually, always being burnt. Always being burnt. That is terrible. It was supposed to be continually burning. Okay, thank you. I know, I was getting daggers from that direction. Like, oh, spear. I knew it was wrong. I just couldn't figure out the right way to say it. What about the nature of the burnt offering does that tell us? That the fire for the burnt offering was always burning. Anybody have any ideas? It was always available. It was always perfect, thank you. It was always available. There was never a time where you could not say, I have trespassed against God. I need to go offer a burnt offering to bring that fellowship back to God. It was always available. Doesn't that tell us something about the nature of God and what he was trying to picture for that Christ was, for us as a Christian, we can always come to God. We can always come before God and say, God, I trespassed against you. I sinned. I've broken that fellowship. I need to get forgiveness. The fire was always to be burning, shows us that God is always willing at any time. He doesn't have a opening schedule and a closing schedule, right? Now at Esh Foods we have an opening and closing. 7:30 we're open, 4:30 we close. You come after 4:30, nobody's going to unlock that door for you. Okay, those office girls are going to turn out the lights and hide. Okay, I've seen it done. Oh, he's coming. Quick, turn out the lights. Lock the door. It's after 4:30. We don't have to answer the door. Mike's like, Now, put it this way. Our pickup area is always available. You can pick up something at any time, 24/7. It's always available. But the office, we're closed at 4:30. You try to call in at 4:01. What happens? Goes to voicemail. Okay, the phone's shut off. It's automatic. But see, for God, for this offering that was given, this burnt offering, it was always available. They could come at any time and offer. That fire was never supposed to go out. It was always supposed to be there. Now, there's something interesting we could think about when we talk about that fire that maybe we could rabbit trail for a few minutes. Anybody? I knew Liz would get it. Go ahead, Liz. When they're, that fire was still supposed to be kept lit.
But you can't keep burning, you don't burn on it.
True. But it's a picture that we're given, yeah. When they're traveling, yes. So a fire was always supposed to be lit. The actual picture here, like how they actually did it, I don't think I was trying to find it out, how they did it. My thought was this. Do you remember when there are certain sons offered what kind of fire? Strange fire. What does that mean happened? They weren't doing their job in keeping the fire for the burnt offering always going, so they brought in a fire from a different area, from something. The idea behind that strange fire isn't that it was spooky, okay? It wasn't like, I don't know, it was green fire rather than yellow fire, okay? It wasn't strange like that. The idea was strange. It wasn't what was supposed to be always kept burning. Most likely, most of the commentators I read were the coals were always hot enough that they could just light that fire right again. Even as they were traveling, somebody had to take care of keeping that fire always lit for the burnt offering. Okay, the idea behind, now I lost it. Who were the sons? Was it the sons of Aaron? Yes, it was the sons of Aaron. Didn't do their job. And God judged them severely because they offered upon a strange fire. They brought a strange fire to offer a burnt offering on, and God judged them. Okay? So, with a picture here is pretty simple, that God's forgiveness is always available. Always available for those who trespass and want that fellowship brought back for them. And then we have Liz who says, well, what about when they were traveling? It's a picture. It's a picture. There's always got to be one. Now, that's a good thought. I didn't actually even think of that. Anybody else have any other thoughts on the burnt offering, the nature of the burnt offering? I'm trying to pull things out because I want you to be thinking, and I don't know that I want to be talking the entire time. Mary?
This is
Okay, you're talking about a different furniture in the temple, in the tabernacle. The golden candlestick and the light that is supposed to be shown from that. It's a little bit different. Here we're equating that fire that always supposed to be burning, the opportunity to ask for forgiveness from God. Yep. So your equation is correct, just a different part of the tabernacle, or then temple after that. Another idea, one that we want to get across here with this is, I got to find the verse. Was it Leviticus 6 or was it back in 1? Oh. Verse 12, it says, "And the fire, it shall not be, the fire upon the altar shall be burning in it, and it shall not be put out." This is the altar outside the tabernacle there. Let's see, maybe it's in chapter 1. I wanted to find this next point. Verse 4, "He put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, he shall be accepted for unto him to make an atonement for him." Now, where in the world does this say it? Verse number... Well, I guess we'll have to read several verses. Verse 7, and I'll read on a little bit. "And the sons of Aaron, the high priest, shall put fire upon the altar and lay the wood in order on the fire. And the priest of Aaron shall lay the parts, the head and the fat, in order upon the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But his inwards and his legs shall be washed with water, and the priest shall burn all on the altar to be a burnt sacrifice, and an offering made by fire of a sweet smelling savor." There it is in verse number 9. I'll just give this one. I didn't read it very well either. Every part, all of it went to the altar. The idea here is it was totally consumed. It was totally consumed. All of it went to the altar. What does this tell us about maybe the Christian and him offering a burnt offering, the picture that is given as we come to Christ and we need forgiveness? What does it tell us about, what's the picture perhaps that we can find from that? Stephanie?
I think in the song, "I surrender all."
Perfect. All of it. We are to be totally given. So I guess the idea that I thought of, and I kind of was with you, I thought of that song, was if we're going to be right with God, and the picture here is for the New Testament believer is a Christian who has sinned, he's missed the mark, he needs to get that fellowship back, we need to get forgiveness, atonement for that sin. So we come to Christ and we say, "God, forgive us." In the Old Testament, it's a burnt offering given. We have to be totally committed. We have to give it all to God. Put your all on the altar before the Lord, or else is their fellowship restored? If we were to hold back part, so if somebody in the Old Testament came and they said, "I need to offer a burnt offering to God, but I want to hold back the leg. I'm going to keep that for my family. I need something to feed them." Is that enough? Is that good enough for God? No, he says give every part. It all need to be. And notice the other part of this, that fire never goes out. The whole offering is consumed. And we're going to talk about each individual part in a little bit, maybe today, if we get to it. But each part represents something as we get into it. Okay? And I'm kind of excited to get to that part, but I don't want to jump too far ahead on that. But it was totally consumed. We need to be totally given to God. Completely given over, completely surrendered to God. We need to be totally consumed, just like that offering was given by the offerer, had to be totally consumed to be right with God. If we're holding back a part, are we having that fellowship with God that we ought to have? No. Not the way it should be. Sam? Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Those old hymn writers knew exactly what they were writing. And it follows perfectly what the scriptures talk about. And I love reading this stuff in Leviticus, and when we talk about it, you kind of understand the picture that it's giving. Man, doesn't it make sense now? It's not just some bloody thing that they had to do. It makes perfect sense, and we'll equate it to what Christ was going to has done for us, was going to do for them. It even makes more sense. Now, as we get into the rest of it, let's get into what Stephanie had talked about. It has some different things that could be offered. What were the three different options that it gives to us in Leviticus that a burnt offering could be? Now, I didn't read the whole thing. Maybe you want to read all the way through it or glance through. Maybe you can get it. There are three different options that it gives for the burnt offering. Okay? Stephanie, you want to give one of them? Did you have it? Cattle. Okay, that's the first one. The first one, it talks about giving the cattle. Okay, let's get all three and then we'll do the equating after that. Sheeps. Sheep or sheeps? Yeah, that was really good. What is the plural of sheep? Sheep. Okay, there you go. Sheeps. I like that. I'm going to write it down that way. Sheeps. Plural. Sheep or goat. I like that Mike said that as well. Sheep or goat. What was the third option that was given? What's that? Turtle dove or a pigeon. Okay, that is found in verse number 14. So these three options. Why the three options? Anybody have an idea why the three options? Oh, somebody said it. Wealth. Yes. Tim, what did you say? Nothing that wants to be repeated, right? Okay. According to their wealth. Why according to their wealth? Why does it give options? What in the world? So the idea here, the nature of the offering, we saw it's totally consumed. We saw it burned all night. It was voluntary. It was according to their possession. According to their possession. Why according to their possession? Liz?
Because it needs to cost them something. It needs to hurt a little bit, but it also needs to be attainable.
Okay, so it needs to be readily attainable. That was my kind of, you got the second part too. We were going to get there. It needs to be readily, should everybody have the opportunity to get back into fellowship with God, to offer that burnt offering, the picture that we're given here? Of course. You say, of course, God wants everybody to be able to have that relationship with him. It's readily attainable for everyone. Okay, this is an offering that was given, a burnt offering, according to your possession you gave to it. So if you had a herd of cattle, you were to offer cattle, a bullock, it talks about. Notice something else here. Let me go through the progression first, and then maybe you'll see it. A bullock, it talks about on the first one, if you have cattle. Secondly, if you had another type of flock, if you had goats or sheep, you were supposed to offer a goat or a sheep. Okay? So if you had cattle, what were you? You were rich. You were upper class, maybe we would say today. Okay, maybe not the 1%, but, upper class anyway. If you had a flock of goats or sheep, what were you? Middle class, okay. If you had neither of those and you only had to offer a pigeon or a turtle dove, what were you? What's that? What did he say? I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Poor, right? What we are. Let me show something to you. What did Mary and Joseph offer when they went to the temple? Anybody remember in Luke? A turtle dove. What were they? Poor. Very poor. Very poor. How much does it take to have a herd of goats? I mean, we said middle class, but really, if you have 15 goats, for us, we're saying, that doesn't seem like a whole lot, other than a whole lot of mess and things getting eaten. Stephanie? you would buy, somebody would raise, and in fact, it got to the point, now if you remember where we got to when Christ, what were they doing? They were selling them, yeah. So it got to the point where it became somebody said, oh, I can make a profit off of this. Let me start the industry of.
So wouldn't someone have to sell them in order for people to get them?
Somebody would have to sell them or raise them.
Just not the temple?
Or, yes. Or what is the other option? Well, no, they couldn't because they had to be something that was domesticated, and we're going to get there. They could not be a wild animal. You could not go as you were walking through the wilderness and go, oh, look, a turtle dove. I may need that. But that tells us something about the offering, doesn't it? It had to be something that they owned. That they owned. So why then would you keep a turtle dove or a pigeon? What would be the purpose of it? To sacrifice. So if you were poor and you said, I want to keep my relationship with God knowing what I am, sinner, somebody who's going to fall, somebody who knows that at some point I'm going to do something I should not do, what did you do if you were wise? You kept a turtle dove or a pigeon. Something. Oh, yeah. Mary's like, I know me. A lot of them. I know Jason. He kept thousands. I mean, he was the Birdman. Stood there like this, and, I was thinking, New York, all the pigeons and come down on you. Yeah. You, if you were wise, you kept one handy. Now, let's follow that even further, because it had to be domesticated. It couldn't be, I fall and I need to go out and find something wild and catch it, and it had to cost you something. Okay, what then happened as families kept pigeons and goats and sheep and maybe even cattle? What happened to those animals that were domesticated? They got named. They became pets, right? Now, think about that. Now, as you offer your burnt offering, now it becomes something a little bit more. It becomes something of a, what are all these things called? Sacrifice that had to be given. Okay? What was the chicken's name? Stephanie? Isabel. Now it's Isabel that has to be offered on the burnt offering. Like, not Isabel! Melody and Stephanie, they had a chicken that they named growing up, and the neighbor caught it, right? The neighbor killed the chicken and said, here, now you have chicken for your dinner. And every time they had chicken, Melody and Stephanie, obviously it wasn't 5 years ago, is this Isabel that we're eating? But see, that's the picture that's perfect for what we're talking about. And if you kept pigeons, if you kept the turtle dove, especially if you have little kids, it got named. Yeah, Isabel went to waste. And ended up having to throw Isabel out. Because every time, is this Isabel? You had to offer something as a sacrifice. It cost you something to get then right with God. Christ, when he came, it cost something when Christ died. And when David went to offer a sacrifice, what did David say? I will not offer anything to God that costs me nothing. He said, here, we'll give you what you need. No, wasn't right. David knew that it had to cost him something to give that offering to God. The nature of the burnt offering, it had to cost something. Now, I wrote down that we'll find Mary and Joseph offering the turtle dove in Luke 2:24. I wanted to give you the verses. 2 Samuel 24:24 is where David talks about it needs to cost him something. It had to cost them something. The nature of the burning. The other thing that I want to talk about when we talk about according to possession, what does it tell us about God? The fact that he would give options. Could God have said a bullock that he wanted? That's what he wanted, and would that have been what they had to do? Yeah. What does it tell us about God? That he gave them options. He's merciful, yeah? Stephanie? And he knows what about us? Everything is right, yeah. He knows our situation. He wants to have that relationship, and he knows our situation. Does he know if you can afford a bullock? And if he says, if you can afford that, then that's what you ought to offer. Does he know if we can afford a goat or a lamb? Yeah. He knows that. He knows the situation. He knows. He wants you to give. He wants you to offer that offering, to have that relationship with him, and he knows what you can afford to do. That does. It shows us about the mercy of God. And he knows our situation. God never asks us to give more than what we can give. You say, this is hard. I don't know if I can do that. Didn't we talk about it being difficult? Isabel. It was difficult, but he knew they could afford to do it. The nature of the sacrifice. I find that fascinating, that complete picture it gives us about God and about the offer and that relationship. Neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God, which of that which doth cost me nothing. Similarly, doesn't God say that we ought to give our best to him? If our best is the turtle dove, then that's what we give. If our best that we can give is the goat, then that's what we ought to give. If we can afford the goat, but we offer the turtle dove, was that acceptable to God? No. Still, we ought to offer our best to God. He deserves the best years, the best days of our life. While we are still energetic, while our minds are still clear, he deserves the best from us. And at each point in our life, that's going to be something different. Okay? At some point in your life, your best may not be as much. And then it grows, and you say, I can afford to do better. And then maybe later in life you say, this is the best that I can do. God, that's what God requires of us. Our best in every situation. God requires our best. We also see the expanse of provision for Christ's sacrifice for men. God died for the rich. Christ died for the rich. Christ died for the middle class. And Christ died for all men. He died for those who could only afford the bird. Christ died for all of us. Notice then, continuing on, it shows that Christ died for all. It was to be a domesticated animal. It was tamed. It's supposed to feed off vegetation. They couldn't offer something that fed off flesh. Say that 5 times fast, because I couldn't even say it once. Only a tamed animal could represent the pure and holy Son of God who gave his life as a ransom for men. It had to be pure. Okay? Leviticus 1:3 says, if his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male, what does it say? Without blemish. Verse 10, his offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep, or of the goats, for a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring in a male without blemish. One last thing that I want you to notice, what gender was the animal to be given? A male without blemish. A male. What is that picture? Christ. It pictures Christ. He was without blemish. God does not demand or deserve our hand-me-downs, our overruns. He deserves our best from us, without blemish. Now I want to get into, before we get there, I wanted to go to Hebrews. Hebrews chapter number 10, if you remember I told you very at the beginning we're going to look at, you can't look at Leviticus, you cannot study Leviticus properly unless you also study the book of Hebrews along with it. You will not get the right things out of Leviticus without knowing Hebrews. It's not possible. It cannot be done. If you study Leviticus without understanding the book of Hebrews, you will get something wrong, almost guaranteed. A lot of people do. I've read it. So it's interesting. Hebrews, how do we look at Hebrews? Well, Hebrews chapter 9. 9 and 10 is kind of a lot. When we look at offerings, which is what we're studying, Hebrews 9 and 10 is where we're going to find a lot of the explanation in the New Testament there. Hebrews 9:10 is Christ is a better offering, or a better sacrifice, whatever you want to call it. Hebrews 9 verse 14 says this, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself, and here's the key, without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. He's a better sacrifice because he was without spot. He was without spot. And then Hebrews 10:10 says this, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ. Why is he a better offering? Once for all. How often do they have to offer a burnt sacrifice? Every time they wanted, because it was voluntary, every time they wanted to make sure that they had fellowship with God. Okay? Every time they knew they sinned, and they wanted to make sure I am right with God. Yeah, I want to be very clear on that because it's the same sort of, but we want to make sure that the voluntary is important. If I want to keep a right walk with God, knowing that I've gotten off the path that I should be on, the only way I can do it is by offering a burnt offering and getting right back on that fellowship with God in the New Testament here. So yeah, as often as necessary, as often as they desire to keep that walk with Christ right, with God right, and to get back on that path. That's how often. So there wasn't a limit. It's available to them. So they had to keep that right fellowship with God. All right, now we want to talk about the offerer's work. The offerer's work. In this sacrifice that was going to come, the burnt offering, what did the offerer do? And what does that mean as we look at the picture that is given? Wow, too much stuff. Yeah, let's get back to Leviticus from Hebrews. And it offers her. We've already seen the first thing. It's voluntary, right? We've already seen that. What's the next thing then as we look at it? And do I want to? Yes, I do want to go there next. Chapter 1, verse number 4. What's the next thing that the offerer was? First of all, they have to come voluntarily. They weren't forced to do this. Nobody came to them with a spear and said, you must offer a burnt offering unto God. Okay? That wasn't what God wanted or designed for them to do. It was a voluntary work that they had to do. What's the next thing that the offerer had to do? Other than coming voluntary and bringing the proper gift according to their station in life, what's the next thing they had to do? Verse number 4. Stephen?
They had to put their hand on it.
Okay. They had to put their hand on it. Now, if we're going to continue this idea of Isabel and bringing something that, no, and the point is, I mean, I love that we have that illustration, one, because it's funny, and two, because it's really a perfect illustration. I mean, what would be mine? Okay? You guys have a dog, you know, if that was what God said that you had to give, it's domesticated, it becomes your pet, it becomes close to you, right? Kind on my cat, or Daisy the dog, you know, that's what God said, not those animals, because apparently they're important. If we're going to follow that through, now they're laying their hand upon it before it is killed for the burnt offering. What is that picture? What does that mean when they're laying hand on it? Is it just ritual? Is it just, oh, put my hand on it?
Showing that they
Or did it show something?
showing that they identified with the sacrifice as
Perfect.
being a sacrifice in themselves.
It was identification. It was identification. They are identifying with the animal that they brought for the sacrifice. He was not obligated to offer the gift. He did it freely, and he chose the quality of the gift freely. Now he is saying, the offerer is saying, I need this, I identify with this animal, that this is the offering that I'm offering, is burnt offering for God, to get that fellowship back with God. What does the identification mean? What does it do? I mean, I could say, well, identify with. I mean, people use identify in really bad ways now, okay? I identify, I mean, right now, you could, cop could pull somebody over and, what's your identification? You could scan the collar and say, you know, I identify as a cat. What does identification mean? It makes it personal. Yeah, it makes it personal. I saw that the other day, I was like, oh boy, we are getting out of control. The funny video that I watched, you know, the guy hands him, the cop pulls the guy over and he takes off, I want your, you know, I need your identification. He takes off the collar and hands it to him. And the guy says, oh, okay. And he handles it very, very well. And finally says, well, if we need to, we'll call animal patrol. And if we can't find your owner, you'll have to be put down. All of a sudden, that guy found his wallet really quick. He no longer identified as an animal. Somebody should think a little bit more as cops anyway. And maybe we need to follow through once or twice. They're identifying with the animal. What was about to happen to that animal?
With the hand on the head and identifying with the animal be almost like death itself as well.
Okay, that answers that next question, so you're right on the money. What was about to happen to the animal? The animal was going to be killed. What we're saying in identifying with the animal is saying, this animal is doing what? It's taking my place. It is dying because of what I did. Right? Because if we're offering a burnt offering, we're saying we lost fellowship with God because of something that we did. It's dying in our place. Because what is required when sin is done? So, death and blood. Right? So, in putting the hand on, they were identifying, saying, this thing, this animal, this Isabel, the goat, okay, Billy, maybe I shouldn't use Billy, Billy. The cattle, okay, the bull, is taking my place. Sin requires sacrifice. Sin requires blood to be spilt. And what they're identifying is saying that this, recognizing that the one who ought to die is me. The offerer is the one who should have died because of sin. But they're saying, this animal is going to die in my place. What is the picture that shows us? What is the biblical principle? Sam?
It's like Christ dying for us on the cross.
What do we call that when Christ died in our place? Substitutionary atonement is the theocratic term. That's not. Yeah, that's right. Theocratic term. It's the theological. Thank you. Theological term that we use. Substitutionary atonement. He died in our place. It should be us. But when the offerer offers his burnt offering to the Lord, they lay their hand upon it. And it happens not as they come up. They don't do it at home. Okay? They don't do it on their way to the tabernacle. They do it right before the animal dies. Because why? Why does it have to be done right before the animal is killed?
So they don't sin in between?
Maybe that's part of it. Tim's like, on my way, I don't know if I'm going to sit in between. I don't know if there's that too.
Hey, I might need a flock.
It may be applicable, yeah. It's not necessarily what I was thinking. Gail, did you have a thought?
It's the immediateness of it. Like, it's a show for everybody to see. This is happening because of what I did. It has to be immediate.
Yeah. Punishment delayed is what?
Worthless.
Worthless. Yeah. What happens if we say somebody, especially, often as children, you did something wrong, and then the punishment happens 2 days later?
They forget what they did.
They don't identify the punishment with the sin that they committed. When we identify with the animal right before it dies, say, I'm identifying right now. It's immediate. There's no delay. They couldn't do it when they were home. couldn't do it on the way, they had to identify right there. What else was around to help with this immediately? Who else was there? The priests. The priests. There were witnesses who then say, oh, this person is offering a burnt offering. Obviously, there's something hindering the fellowship of God, and they had to. Now, interesting equation. Who was our high priest? Christ is a witness to what we have done. So we'll get to some of that other stuff later, but I thought that if you just follow it through. The offerer identified with the living animal because he was going to then be identified with the dead animal. In other words, the offerer recognized that he was the one who ought to die, and the animal was the substitute for that death. The question here then is, could man offer anything to God to appease him for his sin? Was that animal good enough? That's where we come back to Hebrews.
That's where Hebrews says that blood of bulls and goats was never an atonement.
Do you know what verse it is? You're real close. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4 says this: for it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sin. It is not possible. What is the only sacrifice that was good enough? Okay, let me ask this. You're correct, the blood of Christ. Would our sacrifice have been good enough? We say we deserve, because Timmy's giving me a crystal look, that we follow the logic through. They came, they offered the sacrifice, they laid their hands saying, I identify with this animal who is dying when it ought to be me. It's in my place. It died. The Bible says that animal wasn't good enough to take away sins. Is our offering, would our blood have been good enough to take away sins? No, it wouldn't have. But isn't that amazing to you? It doesn't tell you something about who Christ was. He died. What would our sacrifice have been good enough to pay for?
Just the punishment of it, the fact that.
Just that one sin. Have we done more than that? What was Christ's offering good enough for? All sins, for all men, for all time. Shows you how much better Christ is as a sacrifice. Scale of sacrifice.
Even on top of that, the punishment for sin is death and hell, so even if you want to count that as the sacrifice of faith,
Perfect.
there's never an end to that.
Yeah. There is never an end to that punishment for just one.
So there is no.
So our life, our blood isn't good enough. Christ is the only one. It had to be pure, it had to be perfect, that sacrifice. That goes back to the without blemish part.
The best part of that is the scripture says that he's the propitiation for not only our sins, but the sins of the whole world. He covered it all.
Yeah. Yeah, for all time. I mean, it just kind of keeps going. Everything. That's how great Christ was. Shall ever be. One last point, and I'll let you go here. The offerer, let me change the rephrase. Who killed the animal? You have 2 options, priest or offerer. In this case, it was not the priest. You would think it would be. So let me go back to Isabel. Not only did you have to bring an animal without spot or blemish that had to be domesticated, cared for, you had to bring it. Not only did you have to do that, you had to identify with that animal. And some of us would be willing to go that far, but how many of us would be willing to then be the one that kills the animal? How many would have a hard time? I'll put both hands up. He's like chicken.